evening, wherever you are watching us from. It is finally time. All of the questions we've asked will get an answer. Welcome to Melbourne. Last time we had this race as the first of the calendar was 2019. 3.2 miles of action, 14 turns, 4 DRS zones, and a top speed of 340 kilometers an hour.
All right. Welcome, everyone. We are diving deep into Friday's practice session at the Australian Grand Prix.
FP2, to be precise.
FP2, exactly. We've got reports from two great sources. One is Radio Marca, and the other is AS.com.
Both from Spain.
Yeah. And, this is the first race weekend of the season down in Melbourne at Albert Park. So, everyone's really keen to see, how are the teams looking? What are the early signs? And that's exactly what these reports dive into.
Absolutely. Straight off the bat, both sources, they really highlighted Leclerc's performance for Ferrari. He was fastest in this FP2 session.
He was F.
Really fast.
Yeah.
And Radio Marca, they even talked about how he's got this incredible single-lap pace. And they think this Ferrari, the way it's set up right now, it really seems to suit his driving style. They're even suggesting he could be a favorite for qualifying.
Wow, favorite for qualifying already, based on FP2. That's
early days.
It's early, but that's interesting. I mean, we know he's quick, but to be a favorite already?
Yeah, and AS.com, they back this up. They're mentioning his fastest lap was a 1:16.449.
Right.
It's a statement for sure.
Okay, so Leclerc looking strong. What about the other teams? What else jumped out from these reports?
Well, keeping with the theme of impressive pace, we have to talk about McLaren. Both Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris were consistently up there, right around Leclerc's times.
Really? Right.
Yeah, Radio Marca, they used this phrase, calculan tiempos. Basically means they were matching each other's times, like almost lap for lap.
Oh, wow.
And they didn't just look quick over a single lap. They also looked really strong in those longer runs, when they do race simulations. So that hints at good race pace, which is encouraging.
That is very encouraging, especially for Piastri. First race weekend with McLaren, right?
Exactly. And AS.com, they confirmed this. They even said at one point Piastri was briefly in P2, second fastest.
Wow. All right. So we've got Ferrari, we've got McLaren, both looking really strong right out of the gate. What about some of the other big names, though? Like, what about the Spanish drivers, SAINZ and ALONSO? What did the reports say about them?
Yeah, good question. So for SAINZ, who's now driving for Williams, and Alonso at Aston Martin, both reports kind of placed them in that midfield mix. Now, Radio Marca specifically pointed out that SAINZ, he looked good on the medium tires. But then when it came to those quick laps on the soft tires, it seemed like he maybe didn't quite extract everything from the Williams.
Okay, so maybe some work to do there on setup, perhaps.
Perhaps, yeah. Now, Alonso, he apparently had a bit of a frustrating session with traffic. He never really got a clean lap in.
That's always annoying.
It is. And AS.com, they had Sainz down in 11th and Alonso in 13th. And they made a note that neither of them managed a clean lap on those soft tires.
Right. So a bit hard to judge their true pace then if they're stuck in traffic and not getting those clear laps.
Absolutely. You need those clean laps to really get a sense of the car's potential.
For sure. Okay, so we've talked about Ferrari, we've talked about McLaren, Sainz, and Alonso. What about Hamilton? He's in a Ferrari this year, which is a big change. How did he look?
Yeah, so he finished in the top 5, which on paper sounds decent, right?
Yeah, that sounds okay.
But Radio Marca was quick to point out that he was actually 0.4 seconds behind Leclerc. That's quite a gap.
That is a pretty big gap, yeah.
Yeah. AS.com added that, he was actually second fastest at one point, but then he dropped down. And the interesting thing is, they mentioned he was on the radio complaining about understeer. He said he was struggling to get the Ferrari to turn the way he wanted.
That's interesting. So the car clearly has pace, as Leclerc showed.
Yeah.
But maybe it's not as easy to drive as it seems. Or maybe Hamilton's still getting used to it, It's a new car for him.
Exactly. It could be setup, it could be driving style, it could be a combination of things, but definitely something for the Ferrari engineers to look at.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, what about Red Bull? They've been so dominant recently. Surely they were right up there at the front.
Well, this is where things get a little surprising. They actually had a bit of a subdued session, particularly Verstappen.
Really? Verstappen wasn't at the front?
Not really, no. Radio Marca said he was down in 7th and that he seemed to be really struggling with the car.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And AS.com had him even further back in 10th. They said the RB21 was looking a bit nervous, like it wasn't handling as well as usual.
Huh. Verstappen not happy with the car. That's not something you see every day.
Right. And it wasn't just him either. His teammate, Liam Lawson, He was way down in 17th, according to Radio Marca.
Okay, so it sounds like Red Bull might have some work to do on setup or something. Maybe they're just not quite there yet with the balance of the car.
Yeah, it could be. It's unusual to see them both struggling like that.
It is. Okay, so apart from the timesheets themselves, did the reports mention anything else interesting, like any incidents or anything?
They did, actually. There were a few moments. Both Radio Marca and AS.com talked about George Russell having a bit of an off where he went wide.
Oh.
And then there was almost an incident in the pit lane between Norris and Lawson. Radio Marca specifically mentioned that one. Sounded like a close call.
Yikes. Yeah, those pit lane near misses can be pretty scary.
Yeah, for sure. And then AS.com, they also mentioned that Gasly went off into the gravel. Apparently, he had some kind of braking issue.
Oh, no. Braking issues are never good.
Not good at all. And then, to top it off, Nico Hülkenberg apparently damaged the floor of his Sauber. So a few incidents dotted throughout the session.
This is like a bit of a chaotic FP2 then.
Yeah, a bit more eventful than usual, I'd say. But that's often the case in the first race weekend of the season, you know?
Yeah.
Everyone's still finding their feet, pushing the limits, and sometimes that leads to mistakes.
Makes sense. Okay, so last thing I want to touch on is tire strategy. Did the reports mention anything about that or any long runs that the teams were doing?
Yeah, definitely. Towards the end of the session, most teams shifted focus to those longer runs to get a handle on how the tires are behaving. It's crucial information for the race, you know?
Absolutely. So what did they see?
Well, Radio Marca mentioned seeing Alonso and Ocon out there doing what looked like a race simulation. And they also said that Leclerc was following Verstappen pretty closely at one point, maybe trying to get some data on Red Bull's pace.
Oh, that's interesting. Like a little bit of early mind games already.
Could be, yeah. And then AS.com said that Mercedes were running on the hard tires for their long runs while Gasly was on the softs. So different approaches there, different strategies, perhaps.
Interesting. So lots of data for the teams to analyze. Tire strategy always plays a big role in Melbourne, right?
Huge role, yeah. Especially with the weather, you never quite know what you're going to get here.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. What are your main takeaways from these FP2 reports? What are you thinking about going into the rest of the weekend?
Well, I think the main thing is we've got a potential battle brewing at the front. Ferrari and McLaren, they both looked seriously quick. It'll be interesting to see if they can carry that pace into qualifying and the race.
Yeah, definitely. And we can't forget those other teams lurking in the midfield. Yeah. Williams and AstonMartin, they could be in the mix as well.
For sure. And then you've got the Red Bull question mark.
Yeah.
They haven't looked their usual dominant selves, so can they turn things around? That's a big question.
Big question. And Hamilton's feedback about the Ferrari, that's something to watch as well. Is that just a setup issue, or is there something more fundamental there?
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. But it definitely adds another layer of intrigue to the weekend.
Absolutely.
Anything else? Well, I think the fact that some drivers, like SAINZ, didn't set their fastest times on the softest tires, that suggests there's still performance to be found.
Right. There's more to come.
More to come. And those traffic issues that Alonso faced, that just highlights how crucial a clean lap will be in qualifying, especially at this track.
It's going to be tight.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, with qualifying happening at the same time of day as FP2, it'll be interesting to see how teams approach it.
You mean in terms of, like, will they prioritize single lap pace based on what they saw today, or will they focus more on race setup, given that there's always a chance of rain in Melbourne?
Exactly. It's a tough call. Do you go all out for qualifying, knowing that track position is so important here? Or do you play the long game and focus on having a car that's good on its tires for the race? Especially with that rain threat hanging over everything.
It's going to be fascinating to see what they do. Well, I think we've covered just about everything. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Just that, you know, this FP2 session has given us a glimpse into what might be a really exciting and unpredictable season. We've got some unexpected frontrunners, some big names struggling, and a lot of question marks still hanging over everything.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive. For everyone listening, keep an eye out for our next breakdown after qualifying, where we'll see how all of these storylines develop. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of our F1 coverage. Until next time, enjoy the racing.